Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I interview Samantha Davidson, a writer I met at the recent When Words Collide conference in Calgary, Alberta. Samantha's author branding caught my attention immediately, and we talk about the importance of that branding even early in a writer's career, as she is just at the point of finishing the first novel she plans on publishing. What I admire is that she's open to the path that she'll follow for the novel, as well as the YA series that she has planned. And we talk about that, as well as about the way that she helps to inspire creative people, not just writers, but creatives from all pursuits. That's a bit later in the podcast. Right now, a bit of a personal update. Earlier this week, I returned, as I mentioned, from Calgary, where I attended When Words Collide. Samantha and I talk a bit about the conference and some of the highlights in the main interview section of the episode, but I can't say enough about the wonderful community of supportive writers and readers at a conference like this, and that's why I keep returning to it. It's one of those few conferences that I return to on a regular basis every year. This year, I gave 3 presentations at the conference, 2 of a similar flavor to hundreds of talks I have given in the past. They were entitled Knowing the Basics and Steering Clear of the Pitfalls of Digital Publishing. And the other talk was what 25 years as a bookseller and industry rep taught me about the business of writing and publishing. That second topic is going to be part of, or it was maybe even a warm-up to the nonfiction book that I've been working on, and I'm about halfway through writing and plan on releasing later this year. PDFs of both of those presentations will be available to my Patreon supporters at patreon.com/starkreflections. And to find out how you can get access to content like this for as little as $1 a month, check out that website, patreon.com/starkreflections. The third presentation I gave was more related to my author hat, and it was entitled The Art and Business of Telling Ghost Stories. Now, in this talk, I walked through my journey into and through writing nonfiction paranormal true ghost story books for Dundurn Publishing from Toronto. I outlined and shared the advance I received for my books, how that changed over time, the royalties, the contract details, the research, the writing, how I do co-authoring, the whole process of putting it all together. I basically go through the good, the bad, and the ugly about the entire process. And there is good, and there is bad, and there is ugly, messy stuff. And I was trying to be as completely transparent and completely open as I could be so that writers could see for themselves the reality of my experience with these 6 books with Dundurn. Now, basically, I love and appreciate and enjoy the experience, but I do share the ins and the outs, the ups and the downs, because I think it's important for people to understand just exactly what's going on behind the scenes, how the sausage is being made. And I got some great feedback from that, as well as my other presentations. Now, I also, at When Words Collide, I did a free Friday Frights live session on my author Facebook page. So I was publishing it live to my Facebook page at 9 p.m. Calgary time, which would have been 11 p.m. Toronto time, which is my regular time zone. And I did it in front of a live studio audience, and an audience actually showed up, which was kind of exciting and fun for me because, authors know that sometimes audiences don't show up. But having an audience there was a real treat, because it's one thing to do a video in my home office talking to a computer screen. It's quite another to have a live audience in front of me whose reactions I can feed off of. And I do adore doing public readings in front of a live audience, because feeding off the audience is a really good part of that. Now, this made for a far more lively Q&A than I normally have when I do my Free Friday Frights, sitting there by myself talking to a computer screen, which is great. And I hope to do more of these live studio audience versions again soon. Never mind the fact that when I say welcome to whatever and I hear a whole bunch of applause, which, unless I had a little soundtrack on my computer, I'm not going to hear that applause. Now, at When Words Collide, I also joined in on a presentation about audiobooks, where I shared some insights about production and distribution options for audiobooks, where, yes, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, I happen to talk about Findaway Voices and my own experience using them, as well as Listen Up Audio for getting my books produced and out there. Now, Findaway Voices, incidentally, happens to be the sponsor of this episode, and you can check out more about them and how they work with authors and the great opportunities they provide for distribution and production at starkreflections.ca/findaway. I also sat on a few other panels over the weekend, one of which allowed me to share advice to new writers, which is always great because I remember being that new writer in the room and being thirsty for information. Now, I made a point of sharing some of the things I spoke about in last week's episode 34, about the self-doubt that we feed ourselves when we look at comparison and rejection. And I also made a point of reminding the writers not to describe themselves as, quote, aspiring writers, end quote, especially if they're writing something. And yes, even if it isn't published yet, they are writers, period, regardless of whether or not they have published or self-published. They are writers, not aspiring writers. You maybe call yourself an aspiring writer if one day you want to write, but you haven't written anything yet. So there, I'll get off my little soapbox. And now that I'm off my soapbox, now that I've gotten the sponsorship out of the way, and now that I've given my personal update, let's get on to this wonderful conversation with Samantha Davidson. Hey, Samantha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
So I'm really curious to talk about this YA series that you're working on, but before we get into that, I want to look at, so when did you first get into writing?
So I've always been a creative. I've always really been interested in writing. I came out of high school starting, and I was a journalist right out of high school. So writing's always been a passion. Writing now and taking it seriously and wanting to make it a career, I would say probably about 4 years ago.
Okay, cool. And were you always attracted to sort of the YA, that sort of writing, or was it? Oh?
No. So I've read suspense my entire life and thriller.
Okay.
And I started writing suspense. I've actually finished a suspense novel that is sitting on a bookshelf and hasn't seen the light of day for quite some time. So
Okay.
Yeah, started with that for sure. And then it actually was just after last year's When Words Collide conference that I got really kind of disheartened with my work, as most of us do. And for Camp NaNoWriMo, NaNoWriMo, I wanted to start something new and something exciting. And I don't know why, but I was just kind of called to do YA. I had this great idea and I was like, you know what? It's 1 month, it's 50,000 words. Let's just see what happens. And I fell in love with it.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And did you get the majority of the first book done in November?
Yeah, I accomplished, I think I was at 52,000 words by the time I was done. And I was on such a streak that by the end of December, I completed my first draft.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so the suspense novel, was that just a learning novel just to show that you could go through the experience, or what do you think
so.
might happen?
I learned so much about myself and my process with that. I learned that I am not a pantser. And I think I had to go through that to realize that. I still love suspense and I love the story, and it's actually, it's kind of close to me. So I do want to eventually get back into that and maybe finish it or rewrite it or start again. I'm not really sure, but definitely it's kind of a back burner thing. And I think that the YA is something that's exciting and fun and it's calling to me, but suspense is kind of where my heart is. It's kind of where I started, and it's the bones of my writing, I guess.
Okay, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
cool. And this series is you've mapped out how many books in it so far?
Four so far.
Okay.
I say that, but the book that I'm working on now, the first book, w- basically where the book ends was about the first act, when I first
Okay.
mapped it out. So who knows at this point? It could get away from me like this one did.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's fun. And you'd mentioned, so when words collide, so we were both at that conference this
Yes.
last week, and you
Yeah.
talked about last year. How many years have you been attending that conference?
Last year was my first year.
Okay. And you
Yeah,
came back again for
I
another
did.
tour of duty at When Words Collide.
Yes.
Why did you do
Yes.
that?
So last year I knew nothing. I went into every one of those seminars and I took notes. There was words that people were throwing out and I'm like, I don't even know what this is. What are we talking about? Like people would, I just everything. I had notebooks full of random shit, random stuff. Okay. That I had to go back and Google essentially when I got home. And
Okay.
I have grown so much in my journey, in my writing, that I really needed to go back and show myself how much of a growth I had had in the last year. And there was so much I took away from last year that I figured if I could even just take, a percentage of that this year, that I would be ahead of the game even further.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
You had mentioned being disheartened. Was that you done any of the Blue Pencil
Yeah.
cafes, or was it one of those things? What had happened?
Yeah, I did all that.
Yeah. Okay.
um
You don't have to
I
get into detail. That's
No,
okay.
no, it's good. I did Blue Pencil and I also did the live action Slush. So I went in with a semi-finished novel. I wasn't done. And I really needed to know that I was on the right track. And so my Blue Pencil, I came out of with really good reviews, lots of feedback,
Okay.
but great reviews. And so I felt great about that. And then I went into the live action Slush and I took it very personally, and
Oh.
I shouldn't have.
Well,
But
that
I
can be
think,
a tough one too, right?
yeah, and I think that mentally I went into it thinking that this was the be all and end all, and these were the answers that everybody was going to give me, and it wasn't taken with a grain of salt. It was truth, and everything they said was truth, and
Right.
it made me leave there going, I don't know what I'm doing, and
Ah.
even this year I went back and there was a lot of sessions that I outright laughed at because it was things that they were criticizing in what is so common, like when characters wake up in the beginning chapters. And
Right.
these are all things that my novel, as it being my first novel, they all had. And I, coming out of last year, I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm full of self-doubt and fear and everything else. And yeah, it took a little while for me to kind of digest that and realize that I'm beginning. It's just a draft, and I need to get past that and take it all in and make those changes based on that.
Okay. Well, I think it's funny because I always thought that the live action Slush is meant to demonstrate that there's what, three or four people, and they all have a different opinion, and that nobody
Yeah,
is right. So
they all
Fernandez,
had the same opinion.
sometimes they share an opinion, but sometimes you see, somebody, enjoys the entire thing and
Yeah,
was captivated, and the other person one sentence in is done.
yeah,
And I guess that's a challenge because as a writer, we know that we're not going to appeal to everyone, and the biggest challenge is figuring out who the target audience is, so you can you put it just in
yeah.
front of
I
them.
was gonna say, yes, we know that once we learn that. We don't always know that from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say I didn't know that from the beginning. I was like,
Eh,
everybody's gonna love this.
Okay.
Oops.
Well, it happens. Well, here's the thing that I find so refreshing is that you went there, you got beat up a little
Yep.
bit, right? Your ego was beat up,
Oh
and
yeah.
then you returned.
Yes.
That shows some conviction that you have towards the craft, towards learning more, which I think is admirable. But I think there may be a lot of writers, and it does happen, where the first criticism they receive, they just tail between legs and they give up.
Absolutely.
That's
And
not the
it's
case with you.
well, thank you. And I am a strong believer that if you're meant to do something, if you're called to do something, and you know, I've been called to this my entire life. I've always been a creative. I spent, 10 years traveling as a photographer. So like around the world, so
Okay.
I know that creativity is my passion. I know that it's what I'm called to do. And if I let go of that, I'm just going to spend another 10 years not doing what's important to me and not fulfilling the dreams that I have for myself. And one of my dreams, as long as I can ever remember, has been to be published. And so if I give up on that, well, where am I going to end up? If I just have to keep trying, and so what if nobody loves it? As long as I do it, I love it, and that's
Right.
what matters.
Oh, that's fantastic. And
Yeah.
so your second tour of duty at When Words Collide, what were
Yes.
some of the highlights? You said you took pages and pages of notes last year. What were some of
Yeah.
the highlights between last year and this year that you reflect on and think, wow, that's something that I really appreciate hearing about?
So aside from being able to play with an AK-47,
Okay.
that was awesome. um, you know, I think I think it's the experience in the community. So one of the biggest things for me that I've realized is how important that community is, and whether they're local or whether you're finding them online or abroad, it's so, so important to have that. And last year, I went by myself, completely alone. I had nobody else there, and I met a couple of friends, and, we stayed in touch. And this year I went back, and I was no holds barred. I was going out, I was going to meet people, I was going to make connections, I was going to network, and it was awesome. And the community and the people that I spoke with and the inspiration that I came away with is unbelievable. I mean, I think I only have 2 pages of notes this year, but I'm so motivated. I'm so driven. I'm buzzing with like everything this year. Like I'm still coming down off of high, and it's been 4 or 5 days since.
Since the conference ended.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you plan on returning again?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm actually probably going to see if I can get into some of the panels next year.
Oh, cool! Very
Yeah,
awesome. Very
yeah,
exciting.
yeah.
So let's go back to the series. I noticed that when we were speaking earlier, you said you weren't sure what path you were going to take with this series. Were you going to pursue an agent, editor, publisher? Were
Yeah.
you going to do it yourself? However, you have already started on the branding, and
Yes.
and it jumped out at me when I saw the cool signature that you had with your initials.
Yeah.
So when did you start on that branding thing, and why did you start so early?
Oh man. Okay. So branding, again, being creative, it's in my blood, I guess. I I'm self-taught in everything that I do. So my photography, my everything. And I think that having that eye that I do for photography, it kind of translated into graphic design as well. And I spent a couple of years working as a graphic designer just for the heck of it. And so it's just it's part of me having people know and recognize you from whatever it is, whether it's your color schemes or your fonts or whatever it is. So it's kind of always been a part of me, but I knew that especially with my social media, that kind of thing, I want to create my own community of followers and people who follow me for not just because I have pretty pictures out there, not because I post a ton of pictures of myself doing crazy things or fun things or food shots, but because it means something. And that's kind of where all of my branding comes in, is that I want people to stop and, like you did, see what I've done, be intrigued and interested, and go find out more. And I want my entire goal, I guess, in life is to have people walk away from an interaction with me being inspired. And I have a podcast. It's called The Inspired Author. My photography has always been inspired photography, because I want people to walk away excited, and one thing that I've said or one thing that they've seen spur something in them to want to do more or change their life or improve, or yeah.
Oh, that is fantastic. That is really, really cool. While we're talking about the podcast, what
Sure.
URL can people find your podcast at, or where can they?
Everywhere.
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 Okay.
iTunes, SoundCloud, Castbox, yeah, everywhere.
Okay,
Spotify.
fantastic. That is exciting. Now, you also do mentoring and you do coaching and inspiring.
Yes, yes. So the coaching, it's a bit of a new program. I've been working with some clients, and I'm getting really excited because as of June 30th, I'm opening up a few new spots for clients, which is really awesome. I'm so excited to start working with some new
August
people.
30th?
Sorry, September 30th.
September 30th. Okay, cool.
Yes, yeah.
That's like in the
I'm
future,
actually
2018. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm headed to Bali for a week or for 2 weeks in September on a writing conference, actually on
Oh,
a
wow.
writing retreat. Yeah, with the AuthorTube community. So a few of the ladies that are part of that. So, but the mentoring program I've always wanted, and again, I've always wanted to like give back and help inspire other people. And I found for me, probably around the time that I hit about 22, 23, I struggled to find what my passion was, but not just what my passion was, how to incorporate that into a career and how to make money out of it. So, you know, again, going back to photography, what do I do? Do I create, you know, coffee table books or something that has residual income so that I'm not bound to just the hours that I'm shooting
Right.
as income, but something that can continue to generate. And I struggled in a big way to try and find that path and to take what my passions were, what I was good at, and combine them into something that would be sustainable. And I found that. I've finally found that, and I finally know what that is. And so my mentoring services, my coaching services basically take all of that. It takes you know, what you're good at, where your skills are, what your passion is, and mixing them all together and working with my clients to figure out what that means for them, what they can do with their life, where they can find that success, that career, and have a life that they love and that they want to do every day. They want to wake up to it. They're excited about it.
And so this is for creative people, not necessarily
Yes,
writers. So people
absolutely.
among different, so photography, painting.
Singer, songwriter.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's interesting that you tie them all together rather than focusing just on one. So you're a photographer, but you're also a writer. What other creative passions do you sort
Oh
of
man.
explore on the side?
Well, I own a bookish soap company and
Okay.
body products. So I make all
Bookish
natural
soap company?
and
Tell
body
me more.
products. Yeah, so it's called A Novel Idea.
Okay.
I make candles, soaps, bath bombs, lotions, chapsticks, all that kind of stuff, all themed around classic literature.
You're kidding me.
Um,
So what's the URL for this? Because I'm sure many of my listeners, they're writers. There are obviously lots of book nerds among them. You got to check
Absolutely.
that
So
out. What's the URL for that?
it's a novelidea.com.
That's nice and easy. A
Yes.
novelidea.com. So I can
Yeah.
go and get Crime and Punishment soap or something like that, or
Yes,
okay.
it'll be charcoal, I'm sure, something dark.
Well, that's
Yeah,
awesome. I'm gonna have to check that out. Maybe you can
yeah,
send me some pictures of some of those products. That would be
absolutely.
really
Yeah,
something to add.
yeah.
Sorry, we
Very
got sidetracked because I got
yes.
excited about. So you've got that business and you've got other
Yes.
things that are going on.
So I do the graphic design and the photography, and I don't even know anymore. As far as businesses go, that's it. I'm just creative. Like if I can find something to do on the weekend that is something new and fun, and I can create with it, I'm going to do it. Singing, I'm not musically inclined by any stretch, so that's just not even
So
an
that
option.
graphic design background, then when I saw
Yes,
that really cool logo
yeah,
signature logo, that was you. You had actually designed it
absolutely.
because
Yeah.
that's taking advantage of the skills and talent that
Yes.
you have. That's fantastic.
Right.
So when mentoring new creatives, and again, it doesn't have
Yes.
to be writers in general, but people who want to pursue the creative lifestyle,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you've learned over the last 4 years as a writer that you wish somebody like you had been there to tell you back?
Oh man. Yeah, that's you can ask the hard ones here. Um, I would say that for me, and it kind of translates back, but the hardest thing is not getting started. It's the first 1,500 words. So
Really?
getting started, there's always excitement. You're always going to be excited to jump in and just do it. And it's not until you hit your stride that you start to fall apart because you either think you've got it or things aren't as exciting anymore or you're not as inspired maybe to keep going. So getting started is the easy part. It's continuing when things start to slow down, when things start to get hard, and finding your own inspiration and pulling on your reasons why and visualizing exactly where you want to go and continuing to push yourself and the consistency to continue going and continue pushing. That would definitely be one of my top ones. I think that would be everything I start new. It's so exciting. And then
Yeah.
you get in the swing of it and it's not as exciting anymore.
Yeah.
um, the second one I would say is probably perfection is not even in the ballpark.
Okay.
It's, you're never going to achieve perfection. And even if it looks awesome and exciting and bright and fluffy and everybody thinks it's amazing, to you, you're always going to critique it. Or to me, I'm always going to critique it. And there has to be a time where you can sit back and say, you know what, this is as good as I can get this. And I just have to roll with it. And I have to have faith that it's enough. So your perfection isn't in the ballpark. And I guess, especially for creatives, sometimes I'm not okay. And sometimes I'm an emotional basket case, and all the time that's okay. We go on this emotional roller coaster, the writer's roller coaster is what I call it. And, you have highs and you have lows, and you're not a crazy person. And it is just, it's normal. And I think the first time I hit a really hard roadblock, I found Kim Chance. She's part of AuthorTube. I found her video crying in her classroom, and she was completely distraught at her publishing process. And it was the first time I saw something really real out there. Everybody else kind of shows their successes, but you don't see the struggles that go behind that, and people losing their stuff because they don't think that they're good enough. And I guess this kind of goes back to where I was last year coming out of When Words Collide. Nobody shows those dark parts of them. And it's one thing that I've tried to, in all of my platforms, make sure that I do show, because it's not always bright and fluffy and wonderful. So yeah, I am an emotional basket case, and that is okay.
Well, I am one too, so we can
Fantastic.
And I'm sure that, and this happens to all writers out there, right? We tend to only reveal the bright spots, and we tend to hide the darker ones.
Yes.
Because they're difficult to share, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to look less than perfect.
Yeah, that transparency is really, really hard to achieve, because you don't want people to see your faults. You want them to see where you're succeeding, but it's those faults that make you real and genuine, and that's where your authenticity lies.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to come back to wrap it around as we go to close off this chat. Back to the YA series and the novel that you are finishing, and that sort of the acts 2 and 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are your next steps? I know you're not sure which way you're going to go with this, but what are your next steps for that book? Like, what are you going to be doing? What are you going to be looking up? What are you going to be researching?
Sure. So I'm actually just finishing my second full revision on it. It goes out to my editor. I've hired a freelance because I want to make sure that this is perfect. In case
Even before you send it to an agent or an editor at a publishing house.
I want to be able to send it the best possible copy that I can. And I'm fortunate enough that I have a full-time job that can support that. So I have gone the route of an editor, and she's amazing. And so it goes out to her, and when it gets back, we essentially go through revisions and into line edits after that. So
and she does all the edits, like the developmental, the line edit,
She won't do copy, just because by the time we've gotten through developmental and lines, she's a little bit concerned that she's going to be as familiar with it as I am.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, she'll do
cool.
everything else. Yeah.
And then you'll decide whether you're going to pitch it to an agent, whether you're going to directly submit to a publisher, whether you might consider the DIY route for it.
Yeah, I will be querying.
Yep.
It's a bit of a frightening thought.
It is.
It's a big thing, right? Like, it's, again, going back to that fear and that uncertainty, it's definitely there. So I will be querying probably throughout the fall and winter and into the spring. And depending on my responses from that and how I'm feeling about that, and if I get picked up, I'm preparing to do the DIY by next year. My novel, kind of metaphorizes where we are with our strife and our consumption and environmental issues.
Okay.
And so I want to take that and I actually want to release it on Earth Day. So I'm looking at probably an April release if I'm going to do the DIY. If not, it'll be a longer process.
Up to the fates of the publishing gods.
Up to the fates of them. Yeah, exactly.
Now, with When Words Collide, did you make any contacts that were useful in terms of that research? In terms of
Absolutely. I actually spent. I had a blue pencil with Jonas Saul,
okay,
who was amazing, just an absolute gem. I adore the guy, and he had so much feedback. And I spent some time with him on Saturday night, and we just talked about self-publishing and his process. And again, I was so inspired, and he's a dream. He left me all of his information so that I can reach out to him. And if self-publishing becomes a thing, he's definitely willing to kind of mentor me through those waters. Because they're frightening waters. Either way, it's frightening. It's
for sure. And Jonas is hard not to love.
Yes, he is. He's
exactly.
fantastic. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So let my listeners know where they can find you and learn more about you.
Perfect. So you can always find me on my website. It's samanthadavidson.com. Pretty easy. And I'm Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook and Instagram at author Samantha Davidson. Twitter's author Samantha D. And again, my podcast is The Inspired Author, and YouTube, which it's going live. My first video goes up on the 28th of August.
So
there'll
be links from your website for that?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, there definitely will be. Yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward to checking those out. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you for having me.
It was fun to chat with Samantha and get her perspective and feel the inspiration she has for creative pursuits, both in herself and how she helps bring that out in others. I love what she had to say about perfection and about the ugly. Now, in regards to perfection, she reminded me of a quote from a speaker I saw in late 2017, Darren Lacroix, who reminded us that perfection is the enemy of done. That's something that writers regularly struggle with when they're writing draft after draft after draft and just want to get it that much more better before they send it to an editor or publisher or are ready to self-publish it. Perfection is the enemy of done. Love that. Have to remind myself of that all the time. But I also like what Samantha has to say about authenticity and the ugly and revealing those dark moments, those dark spots. As she says, sometimes it's not okay. And that works hand in hand with perfection. We want so much to look perfect and unblemished when presenting ourselves and our brands out into the world. We want to hide the darkness. And when others look, they only see the polished, the edited, the scripted, that tip of the iceberg. They rarely see the raw, the rough, the reality. It's challenging to let down our guards and let people see the multi-layered and complex people that we are. But when we do, it is so rewarding. For example, people assume because of my extensive experience speaking on stage and being a guest on podcasts and on radio and even on television programs that I'm confident, that I'm outgoing and an extrovert. Well, when you put me in the right situation, I can act like an extrovert, but I'm actually quite shy and I much prefer hiding in a corner and watching people. That's usually how I enter a room. I shuffle off to the corner so I can get comfortable and figure out everything. Because I am really, really nervous when I'm out and about in public. Now, unless, of course, I'm being introduced and put onto a stage, in which case when I get into the room, I have a purpose, I know exactly where I'm going, and I'm okay with that. In a crowd, I'm a nervous mess, and I regularly worry that I won't bring any value to a conversation or a discussion. Even when I'm on a panel on stage with others, I also panic because I look at them and I see the value that they're bringing. They're bringing this wonderful value and well thought out content, and they say amazing things, and I feel like I'm just sitting there occupying space and occasionally opening my mouth and some stuff comes out. I struggle with this repeatedly, despite years of experience. I am perhaps an introverted extrovert, or maybe I'm an omnivert. I'm shy and I like to blend into the back of a crowd or just enjoy my solitude and people watch. The minute you put me on stage, I immediately chameleon myself into the role I'm expected to play, and I do my best to deliver what the audience expects. And so that's sort of the two solitudes of the way that I deal in a crowd and handle things. Again, it's the ugliness and the perfection that you may see as an exterior. When I was admitting this type of thing while on a panel this past weekend, it was really refreshing for me to see, because I asked for a show of hands, that perhaps 75% of the people in the room sort of felt the same way. It was a great thing to realize when you're walking around at a conference of more than 700 people and realize that between 500 and 600 of those others are introverts just like you. You already have that much in common with everyone else there, which is great for ice breaking and for opening conversations, such as, boy, wouldn't you rather be hiding somewhere, but maybe back in your hotel room? In any case, I wanted to also do a quick shout out to Andy, who approached me at When Words Collide. I was just about to be setting up for one of my presentations when he came into the back of the room and introduced himself to me. Now, despite having those same shy and introverted tendencies like me, Andy overcame it, and he wanted to say hi after having heard me on this podcast and many other podcasts. Now, his reaching out made my day and became one of those bright moments from this past conference that I'm going to remember. And I recognize how difficult it must have been for him. I made sure to remind him of the strength and the bravery he showed in doing that, because he put himself out there. I didn't have to. This is something I truly respect and admire, because I find it so ultimately tough to do the same thing when I'm interested in saying hi or meeting someone. So thanks, Andy. And also, Andy, I really hope that you look into markets to send that awesome poem about bookselling that you shared with me. It resonated with this book nerd, and I'm positive that it will with thousands of other people like me for whom bookselling is a part of our DNA. Well, that's it for this episode of Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, wishing you great writing and good reflections. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you again next week in episode 35.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomtech.com.